Pride and Prejudice doesn't feel like a period drama you watch. It feels like you get pulled into a room and forced to notice every silence. A ballroom where politeness turns into warfare. A country walk that becomes a verdict. A letter that lands like a weapon and rearranges everything you thought you knew. Colin Firth's Darcy barely speaks, and somehow the quiet is louder than confession. Jennifer Ely's Elizabeth can turn a single look into an argument you feel in your ribs. The hand flex, the stare across the room, the pause before a sentence that changes the air. But beneath that elegance, this version was made with rebellion in its bones. The production had to fight for the money first, then survived the grind once the world finally existed. The chemistry between the two leads wasn't just acting. It was real. And one of the most famous moments in the entire series wasn't in the book at all. It was invented for the screen. These are 11 weird facts about Pride and Prejudice, the adaptation that didn't just retell Austen, it changed what period drama could feel like. Stay to the end because this version didn't just earn fans, it also created rivals. Number 1. This Austen began as a rebellion. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice did not begin as a polite prestige project. It began as a correction. Back in 1986, producer Sue Burwhistle and writer Andrew Davies watched a preview of Northanger Abbey and came away with the same feeling. Austen kept getting treated like glass, too careful, too tasteful, too locked inside drawing rooms and polite manners. They wanted something warmer, sharper, and more alive. Burwhistle said the quiet part out loud very early. Pride and Prejudice runs on sex and money. That was the breakthrough, because once you say it that bluntly, the whole story changes shape. This is not just about elegant conversation and wounded pride. It is about desire, property, marriage, class, pressure, and the terrifying fact that a woman's future can hinge on who proposes, who inherits, and who gets trapped. Older adaptations had smoothed that over. Burwhistle and Davies wanted to stop doing that and make Austen feel dangerous again. That sounds obvious now, but at the time almost nobody was eager to help them do it. Costume drama was seen as stale, and the BBC had already adapted the novel in 1980, making executives feel it was too soon to return. The idea stalled and survived on sheer stubbornness. Davies was even pushed sideways first, steered toward adapting Middlemarch to prove he could handle major literary material. Only after that did the Austen project breathe again. Then the money problem hit. The version Burwhistle wanted was not small or studio-bound. She wanted scale, locations, texture, and movement, a version that felt cinematic instead of embalmed. The BBC could not carry that ambition alone, and that is where A&E changed everything. American co-production money closed the gap and gave the series the budget it needed. This version took nearly a decade to happen, and it only happened because two people looked at the way television kept cleaning Austen up and decided the story would work far better once it admitted what had been driving it all along. Number 2. The elegance cost more than it looked. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice cost around £1 million per episode, which was enormous for television at the time. This was not a modest costume drama tucked into a few safe rooms. It was something bigger, more cinematic, and more physical. That ambition created immediate problems. The series leaned hard on location shooting, which is why it still feels so open and alive, but that meant the production had to move through around 24 historic properties, each one coming with its own rules. The clearest example was Pemberley. The production chose Lime Park for the exterior, giving Darcy's home exactly the grandeur the series needed. But the National Trust had only recently taken over the property and was cautious about handing it to a film crew. They allowed access to the grounds but not the interiors, so Pemberley had to be split between two separate houses. That kind of compromise kept repeating itself. The places that gave the series its beauty were real, fragile places, not always thrilled about a large production stomping through them. And even once locations were secured, the modern world kept barging in. RAF and NATO planes kept roaring overhead during filming, especially at the big outdoor estates, ripping through the sound and forcing the crew to stop and wait. On screen, everything feels effortless. Off-screen, it was an expensive logistical machine hauling itself across historic properties, splitting houses into pieces, negotiating access, and stopping for fighter jets just to protect the illusion. Number 3. They had to build Regency from scratch. One of the reasons the 1995 Pride and Prejudice feels so complete is that the clothes do not just look right, they explain the world. Class, confidence, taste, money, who belongs where, who is trying too hard. You can read half the social hierarchy before anyone opens their mouth. The problem was the production could not pull that world off a rack. There was barely anything to rent. Costume designer Colin arrived to find available Regency stock that was limited, worn out, or simply wrong. So instead of selecting from a rich archive, she was staring at a shortage. The series needed elegance, abundance, and detail, and the wardrobe houses could not hand it over. The costume department wound up producing more than 160 costumes from scratch. Fabrics were hand-printed, trims carefully controlled, patterns chosen not just for beauty, but because they quietly communicated money, geography, and character. The whole visual world had to be created piece by piece, and the clothes could not feel museum stiff. Birtwistle and Davies had always wanted to escape the embalmed look older costume dramas carried, where people seem arranged instead of alive. The actors had to look like they could walk, ride, breathe, and fall in love in these clothes. That is why the differences between groups land so cleanly. The Bennets live in softer country tones, creams, florals, and lighter fabrics, a world that feels modest and slightly less polished. Darcy, Bingley, and the Bingley sisters arrive in better cloth, sharper lines, and more structure. You can see money before it speaks. Elizabeth moves in simpler, practical dresses that let her walk and push against the decorative role expected of her. Miss Bingley dresses upward for display and social performance. And Darcy's clothes, especially the boots and breeches, were designed to work for him almost like modern jeans and a t-shirt, natural in his own authority, never ornamental. The clothes were telling you who had power before anyone said a word. Number 4. The 1995 version turns manners into pressure. The genius of this version is that it never treats Austen like a story about people standing around in pretty clothes. It treats her world like a trap. In Austen, the danger is not war. It is manners, rules, money, rank, the wrong word in the wrong room, one pause too long before a reply. People are not fighting with swords. They are fighting with smiles, posture, and sentences polished just enough to hide the insult underneath. This version rebuilds the social machine, trapping every character inside it. The dances are the clearest example. They are not decorative. The dance floor is one of the most dangerous places in the story, public, formal, and intimate, with everybody watching and attraction, embarrassment, and status all moving at once. That is why the cast spent 2 weeks learning the dances before filming. At Lucas Lodge, the floor was polished so smooth the actors kept slipping, so the crew solved this very Regency problem in the least Regency way possible and poured Coca-Cola on the floor. The series wanted grace badly enough to get sticky behind the scenes. Makeup was stripped back so faces would not look modern. The actors had to learn Austen's language with real precision because her dialogue cannot survive vague delivery. A line can sound polite and still wound. A pause can expose the whole room. So many of the cast later said the work felt closer to stage acting than ordinary television. Number 5. The letters had to hit like scenes. One of the biggest dangers in adapting Pride and Prejudice is not the dancing, it is the letters. In Austen, letters do not just pass information around. They expose lies, reorder loyalties, and shift the whole story under Elizabeth's feet. That works beautifully on the page. On screen, it can kill momentum fast, because watching someone silently read for 2 minutes drains the life out of a scene. The 1995 version stopped treating the letters like paperwork and treated them like attacks. The best example is Darcy's letter after Elizabeth rejects him. In the novel, that letter is the hinge, beginning to tear apart everything Elizabeth thought she knew about both Darcy and Wickham. Andrew Davies reshaped it, and his smartest move was the order. Austen places Jane and Bingley first, then turns to Wickham. Davies flipped it, moving the Wickham revelation forward, so the letter opens on the more scandalous wound. The audience gets pulled in immediately, not by manners, by betrayal. Then the scene lets Darcy stay present, his voice running over the reading so the letter stops feeling like dead exposition and starts feeling like contact. He is gone but still in the room, in Elizabeth's head, in the silence. The reading becomes intimate and almost invasive because she cannot keep him away anymore. The production also took letters seriously as physical objects. Handwriting was done properly. Paper was aged, so it looked traveled, opened, and lived with. The series understood that a letter in Austen is never just text. It is status, secrecy, emotion, and strategy. Every time the show stops for a letter, it is not stopping the action. It is delivering it. Number 6. Colin Firth almost walked away from Darcy. Colin Firth almost walked away from Mr. Darcy. Not because he was too busy, but because he honestly did not get it. At first, Darcy looked dead to him. A man who stands in corners, says very little, and makes every room colder. Firth had grown up with the same dismissive idea many men had about Austen, that it was too delicate to have much to do with him. Then, the pressure got worse. The moment he mentioned the role, he discovered that people were already attached to Darcy in a way that felt almost protective. Family members begged him not to do it, terrified he would damage the image they already loved. The role felt like sacred territory, and Firth still was not sure there was enough there to play. Meanwhile, Sue Birtwistle kept circling him. She saw something he did not yet, that he could stand still without going blank, hold tension without disappearing, and make Darcy's silence feel charged rather than empty. But there was still the visual problem. The version the production wanted carried a darker, brooding, almost Byronic edge, and Firth's natural coloring was lighter and fairer. So they started building Darcy from the outside. His hair was dyed darker, his eyebrows darkened, even his lashes altered, shaping the character from the exterior while Firth was still figuring him out from within. What finally turned him was not a grand revelation. It was jealousy. The longer he stayed near the role, the more possessive he became. If he walked away, somebody else would get to be Darcy. And somewhere in that feeling, the part stopped being a trap and became something he did not want another man to have. That is how Colin Firth became Darcy. Number 7. Real feelings made Darcy and Elizabeth burn hotter. One reason the 1995 series feels so charged is that the chemistry was not only happening on screen. Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth began a real relationship during filming. It was messier than it sounds, because the first major scene they had to shoot together was not soft flirtation. It was the first proposal, one of the most painful, exposed, emotionally loaded scenes in the entire story. Before they had any chance to settle into each other gently, the series threw them straight into confrontation. That beginning left a mark, and people around the production started noticing that the connection had stopped looking like ordinary co-starrees. But real feeling does not always simplify performance. Firth later admitted it sometimes complicated everything, because he was not only trying to play Darcy's longing, pride, and restraint, he was also trying not to confuse those feelings with his own. Pride and Prejudice makes that especially difficult because Darcy and Elizabeth do not move cleanly toward romance. They misread each other, wound each other, and resist for a long time before anything is allowed to bloom. The relationship lasted about a year after filming, then ended quietly. Neither actor turned it into a public spectacle, which left more room for speculation than either of them wanted to feed. The result on screen is not some easy fairy tale of two actors falling in love while playing two people falling in love. It is intimate, charged, and just complicated enough to keep sparking. Number 8. The most famous moment was never in the book. The image most people carry away from the 1995 series is not a proposal. It is a wet shirt. Darcy dives into the water at Pemberley, comes back out soaked, and finds himself face to face with Elizabeth, forced into polite conversation while looking like the last thing he wants is company. The moment lasts only a few minutes and ended up defining the whole series. Jane Austen never wrote it. Andrew Davies invented it, and it was not meant as a grand erotic set piece. In his head it was funny, catching Darcy off duty, briefly free of social armor, and then slamming him back into formality the second Elizabeth appears. Originally, Darcy was going to dive in completely naked, briefly free of status and performance, but the BBC was never going to allow it. Underclothes were discussed, but looked wrong for the period. So the famous compromise was born. Keep the clothes, soak the man. Even then, the moment was carefully assembled. A stunt double handled the full jump, and underwater material was filmed separately. One of the most spontaneous-looking scenes in the series was built piece by piece. Then something unexpected happened. A scene written as a comic moment stopped belonging only to the writers. The wet shirt took on a life of its own, became one of the most famous moments in British television, and Darcy came out of the lake as a legend. Number 9. This version hit the balance the others missed. Before 1995, Pride and Prejudice had been adapted in two completely different ways, and neither had found the right balance. The 1940 film had star power, glamour, and old Hollywood confidence through Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier, but it smoothed and lightened the novel until it felt closer to a polished studio romance than a sharp social machine. The 1980 BBC version pushed the other way, staying close to the text and earning real admiration, but the production felt enclosed and stage-bound, so determined not to betray Austen that it sometimes seemed afraid to breathe. One version gave audiences sparkle, but not enough Austen. The other gave them Austen with the life pressed down. The 1995 series walked into that gap and solved the problem by refusing to choose either side. It kept the language, the class pressure, and the social architecture while opening the whole thing up physically, emotionally, and visually. Suddenly, the story moved. Number 10. This series changed period drama for good. When the series aired in 1995, it did not drift quietly onto television. It hit like a correction. For years, costume drama had carried a reputation for being tasteful, worthy, and just a little lifeless, the kind of thing people admired more than loved. This version broke that mood immediately. It kept the intelligence and class tension but made the whole form feel warmer, sharper, and more alive. Austen did not feel preserved anymore. She felt dangerous. The series let desire, embarrassment, and social pressure sit right on the surface instead of hiding under prestige stiffness, and the result played like an event. By the time the final episode aired, it had become a national obsession in Britain. People were waiting for it, arguing about it, and going back once home video arrived. The awards followed. Jennifer Ely's Elizabeth was praised as definitive, and the real story was influence. This version helped power the 1990s Austen revival and gave later literary adaptations a new template built on high production values, emotional accessibility, and absolutely no patience for the idea that period had to mean stiff. The clearest example of its reach is Bridget Jones's Diary, which took the Colin Firth Darcy image and folded it straight into modern romantic comedy. By the end, this was not just the definitive Pride and Prejudice. It was the version that made period drama wake up. Number 11. The new film split the Austen world in two. By 2005, Pride and Prejudice was not sitting quietly as a beloved classic. It was waiting for someone new to touch it, and the second Joe Wright's film arrived, the whole thing split into camps. On one side were viewers who had the 1995 series in their bones, the faces, the rhythm, the restraint. For them, it was not just an adaptation. It was the screen form of Austen itself. The 2005 film came in with completely different energy, younger, faster, messier, and more physical. The world looked muddy and windblown. Emotions were closer to the surface. Keira Knightley gave Elizabeth a quicker, sharper restlessness. Matthew Macfadyen played Darcy with hesitation, like every feeling had to fight its way out of him. For one group of viewers, this felt thrilling and urgent. They did not care that the film compressed Austen hard. They cared that it made the story feel intimate and alive. For another group, that same move felt like betrayal. Once the 2005 film got popular, the story was no longer living in one accepted screen form. It had a rival with its own devoted following and its own idea of what Austen should feel like. The argument became about ownership. The 2005 film did not just adapt Pride and Prejudice again. It made people defend the version they believed was the real one. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice does not play restraint halfway. It turns silence into tension, glances held a beat too long, letters that hit like consequences, and a Mr. Darcy who can change a room without raising his voice. The surface is elegant. The pressure underneath is relentless. So tell us where you stand. Is the 1995 version still untouchable for you? Or did another adaptation win your heart? Drop it in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and we will keep digging into stories like this, the ones that look elegant on the surface and turn out to be full of pressure underneath.